Hey guys, welcome back to Kalei Plants. It's me again, Mark, and today we're back at the greenhouse, and here is our first video for our refreshed succulent specific care guides. Now, if you've been following the channel for a little while, you would know that I used to make daily care guides for succulents, and I will be restarting that again now that I have some experience with my newer succulents. So you would see here that these are the succulents that we will be featuring this week. And for today's video, we're gonna be starting with our Echeveria Agavoides Gilva, or what is commonly known as Echeveria nevada. So just so you know how these videos will be structured, I will be sharing with you information on these plants' origin, on the description of these plants, of their care needs when it comes to sun exposure, to watering, and to their potting mixes. I will also be talking about propagation of these plants, and I will be giving you more extra details when it comes to problems and if it's good for shipping here in the Philippines, in our area. So that will be probably in the last parts of this video, so I hope you watch till the end of this video, guys. Now let's go back to our featured plant, and that is again Echeveria Gilva. This plant that I'm currently showing you, this is not an Agavoides Echeveria. Why? Because this is already a cultivated hybrid when it was first discovered, when it was first described by Sir Eric Walther. So if you've been reading the Crasulaceae website, there's a lot of succulents which are first described by Eric Walther. Now, we wouldn't say that he discovered it, because a lot of the succulents that we have is already in cultivation before those who are documenting them found them. So before the documenters found the plants, they were already in cultivation. People were already caring for them in their homes, and they were not actually found in the wild. So some plants even are not found in the wild at all. They're already found in cultivation, and this is one of those plants. And this is not a species of Echeveria. This is actually a cultivated hybrid. It is a cross between Echeveria Agavoides and Echeveria elegans. So you will see here that it has the influence of Echeveria Agavoides on its green and shimmering leaves. It's got that shine when you look at it closely on the leaves. And also it has that influence from the elegans because of its compact growth. So it's a very compact, tight rosette. It's one that doesn't tend to stretch out very quickly, because you will see the leaves are always compact. They're growing closely packed together. Now, when it comes to flowering, this plant will produce tall stalks of beautiful flowers which are bell-shaped. They hang downwards, and they are small flowers, probably in pink colors with a bit of warmer throat. So it's got pink on the outside, the flowers, and the inside of the flower will be probably orange or yellow in color. So that's how most Echeveria flowers looks like. Now also, just so you know, this plant has 4 different cultivars currently in the market, and that is the Blue Surprise, the red and the Eyeful cultivar, and also this green variety, this green version. So there are other varieties of this plant. The Blue Surprise, actually, I've made a video about that, and I didn't know that before, but the Blue Surprise is another form of the Echeveria Gilva. And then there is also a more reddish form, which probably because of the Agavoides parentage form that turns red when it becomes stressed. So there is another variety of that. And then there is the Eyeful variety, which is probably smoother in comparison to this plant, and it seems to have longer leaves compared with this plant. And then there is the green version, which is this plant. This is the green version. This is probably the main version that we see. And also what I found here in the Philippines, the one that is usually found also in sellers, is the Blue Surprise. That is actually another version of the Echeveria Gilva. That is the same plant. So the Blue Surprise just has a bluer color. So I've made a video about the Blue Surprise. I will probably show that in the link on the screen. Now let's talk about the care needs for this plant. When you first buy this plant, you would probably buy this unrooted, bare rooted through shipping, or you can also buy this as a common succulent here in the Philippines with roots and with potting mix. But I would recommend that you replace that potting mix, and also you make your own potting mix that is suited to your location here in the Philippines or suited to your care needs. What I would recommend is, if you don't have any idea on potting mixes here in the Philippines, I would recommend you mix in 7 parts pumice and 3 parts organic material, including vermicast, carbonized rice hull, or coco peat. So whichever is your preference, or whichever is more accessible to you. You can also mix in compost, but I would highly recommend that you still have 7 parts of pumice on it so that the plant can dry out much faster. This is planted in a clay pot and it's in a mixture of cocoa peat and pumice. So that's the potting mix that I used for this plant. Also, I added some vermicast on it as a fertilizer so that it can grow bigger. So you can see here there's already development on this one since I bought it, because when I bought it a lot of leaves dropped when it reached here, and now it's producing new leaves. And actually this one has some sunburn as well. So now, related to the sunburn, we're gonna move on to our sun exposure with this plant. I would really recommend that you give this filtered sun. You can give it probably morning sun while it is still rooting, and then filtered sun for the rest of the day. Like here in my greenhouse, it gets filtered sun for the whole day. But I would recommend you avoid giving it much direct or much blazing hot sun or extreme heat, because it tends to burn. So you can see here that there are burning already on the leaves of this plant. So you can see here there's already burning here. So that's because it's getting too much heat, too much sun in my area here in my location. So I've actually been moving this back away from the direct sun here at my greenhouse. So I'm giving it more filtered sun. Now, some people will say that this can also thrive indoors, but that is if you have a lot of sun exposure at the side of your house, because this one is an Echeveria. It can get stretched, it can etiolate, so the leaves will, they will fall down backwards, they will grow backwards, unlike this one which grows much more tighter. So the leaves can grow downwards if it doesn't get a lot of sun. Even if it's a compact plant, it will still etiolate, it will still grow. So you will see also that the tips of your plant will be much higher than the outer side of the rosette. That's when you know that your plant is etiolating. So I would avoid giving it too much shade. I would really recommend you give it sun. And also, it can be prone to rot if you don't give it enough sun. So I would really recommend you grow this plant in morning sun with filtered sun for the rest of the day. If you don't have yet the filter or the protected space in your area for the heat of the sun, I would recommend you invest on that first before you start buying a lot of this Echeveria Gilva, because they tend to really burn when in full sun. Now, the other variety of this, the Blue Surprise, I find that more heat tolerant compared to this one. It can tolerate a lot more sun because that plant has a lot more farina compared with the regular version of the Echeveria Gilva. Now, when it comes to watering this plant, a lot of people may have issues with it because it's kind of infamous here in the Philippines for dying, for rotting, because a lot of people really overwater this plant, because some people will say that it's an indoor plant, but when they put it indoor and they water it a lot, it gets rot very quickly. So I would really avoid watering it a lot when it's placed indoors. So you have to adjust your watering depending on the plant's location. If you're growing it in a lot more sun, if you're growing it in a filtered area sun, if you're growing it in a sun with filtered light all day and it's getting heat all day, then it can tolerate a little more watering, and actually it grows fast if you water it a lot. But if you're growing it in a dimly lit area, if you're growing it in medium light, or if it only gets partial light and not whole day of sun, then I would recommend you don't water it very often. You really wait for the potting mix to dry out thoroughly and for the leaves to wrinkle a little bit before you start watering, because this plant, it can hold on to water for a little while. If it's a little bit protected from the sun, it can hold on to water for a very long time. But if it gets a lot of sun, it can also get thirsty quickly. So you will just have to adjust your watering on this plant. Also, if you're already growing this in full sun, I would recommend that you water it a lot more, because the water will help with the sunburn. It will help avoid the plant getting sunburn. And also, if it gets burned, it can replace the leaves much easier if it's watered more often. I would say that while I'm growing this plant, it's a little bit of a medium to fast grower. So it's not as slow as your other succulents. It's not as slow as thicker leaf varieties. It can produce a little bit of growth quickly, especially if you manage to establish it quickly. So some potting mixes, if you make a potting mix that is just right for succulents, if the roots really attach itself to the potting mix, then it can develop much more quickly. So I find that with my plant, because it's in a cocoa peat mixture, it managed to root quickly and it also managed to produce a lot of growth. But I would recommend the coco peat mixture only if you're using a clay pot like this, because if you put coco peat in a very deep plastic pot, then that may hinder root development. So I would really avoid coco peat on deep pots, only on shallow and on clay pots. So you can do the same that I did with this plant, and you can give it a lot of sun, and you will have probably not a lot of problems with it. Actually, this plant is probably burning, but I don't see it getting thirsty, or maybe a little bit. So if the leaves are still shiny, I usually would avoid watering it. But if the bottom ones are wrinkled, then I will start also watering it. So now, when it comes to propagating this plant, I believe that some people propagate via leaves. And usually, if you propagate via leaf, you can get two-headed, three-headed plant, which much like this. This could be a leaf propagation that produce 3 pups. So 3 babies here, and now there are 3 heads on this one. But this plant, if you propagate it via leaf, it has a chance of producing a crested baby, which may not be to the liking of a lot of people. So some people don't like crested plants, but some will actually like crested plants. But I find that crested plants are much more difficult to care for than your usual normal single-headed succulents. So I would recommend, if you don't want crested plants, you can also behead it. If you manage to get a large rosette size of Echeveria Gilva, you can behead it and it will produce pups on the side. I've made a video about beheading several times before. And also, I believe that if it gets mature enough, if it grows a lot, if you manage to grow it a lot, it can also produce clumps on the sides. Because of the Echeveria elegans influence, it can also produce babies on its sides once you manage to grow it big. So that's what I would say is good about this plant. But I wouldn't say that you should rush propagating it, because it's not one that easily propagates, especially if the leaves are not yet big and not yet thick. If the leaves are still thin and they're not full with water, so if you haven't established it yet, then the leaves may have a low chance of producing babies for you, because Echeveria leaves are notorious for not propagating very quickly. I would recommend propagating by leaves. If you want leaf propagations, I would recommend you try Graptopetalums and not Echeverias. Now we're gonna move on to the problems of this plant, and it could have a lot of problems. I told you before, it can have problems with rot, but you can avoid that with sun exposure and just moderate watering. And it can also have problems with sunburn, so you can also avoid that with protection from the sun. So it can be a little bit sensitive. It can also have problems with pests, so that's, I would say, it can have problems with mealybugs. These nooks and crannies on the rosette of the plant, mealybugs could enter through that, and it can be difficult for you to remove those pests. So I would recommend you try adding Starkle G if you find pests on your Echeveria nevada. But I would really recommend you don't neglect your plants, because if they get neglected, they can attract mealybugs and they can attract ants. So I would recommend that you watch out for your plant if it's getting a lot of damage, sunburn, rot, or overwatering, that you adjust your care quickly with this plant so that it won't be neglected, so that it won't grow weaker and it won't attract ants and mealybugs. I would also like to add with the problems of this plant, if you buy it from online and if you're receiving it through the mail, then it can probably have problems with shipping. The leaves can tend to get mushy at the bottom if you receive it through shipping, and if the seller hasn't, properly air dried their plant. So it may lose some of its leaves while in shipping, and you might find that what you receive is not identical to the plant that is posted by the seller. So you just have to be mindful of that. Be patient with the plant, let it recover first before you expect it to produce a beautiful rosette. So this plant of mine actually looked worse when it first came, so it's actually looking better right now. But when it first came, a lot of its leaves just dried up or got mushy or got yellowish, so I had to remove it before I replanted it. So you just have to be mindful with that. Maybe if you buy in a more reputable seller, from more experienced sellers, then you can have a better experience with this plant when it comes to shipping. But I wouldn't rely on it very much, because I just know that this plant, it doesn't do in shipping very well. I've had other Echeveria Agavoides hybrids, cultivars, also delivered to me, and they also didn't do very well in shipping. So you can try maybe buying from actual stores, so that you can avoid damages on your plant, so that you can get a full-size plant that won't be, stressed in a box. So you can buy them from actual shops and not from online sellers if you really wanted to. But you can buy them much cheaper from online. So that's what I would say, especially here in the Philippines. It's a very common plant. I believe some sellers will sell a small size succulent like this for 35 pesos or for 50 pesos. Actually, talking about it, I just remembered that I actually got this plant for 50 pesos. So if I'm not mistaken, it was probably 50 pesos. The seller was doing a live selling, and then I asked for an additional Nevada, and she picked up one and she said that it's for 50 pesos. So I got a three-headed one for 50 pesos, which is really cheap, which I bought online. You know, it just had to recover because it didn't ship very well. But I'm very happy to get a three-headed plant, because if you get one plant, just one head, it may take a little while before you can manage it to grow 3 heads like this one. So getting a bigger plant is also better if you're buying from online. So I think that's about all I can say when it comes to the Echeveria Gilva or Echeveria Nevada. It's commonly called Nevada here in the Philippines. If you really like this plant, please make sure to hit the like below. If you also like the tips, the care tips that I gave you in this video, please make sure to like. And also, if you have any other questions when it comes to this plant that I haven't discussed, please make sure to comment it below. I will try to answer your questions once I read them. And if you have any other requests for specific video care guides for our succulents, if you have any plant that you want to see in this series, please make sure to comment it down below so that I will know what plants I will show to you next time. So now that's about it for this video, guys. I will see you on the next one. Bye bye.